There is a person you know. Maybe you went to school with them. Maybe they work down the hall from you. Maybe you see them at social events, at family gatherings, in the gym, online. And no matter what situation they walk into, they carry themselves differently. They speak without hesitation. They don't apologize for taking up space. They don't look to others for permission before making a decision. They seem immune to the kind of self-doubt that stops most people in their tracks. And if you're honest, part of you has always wondered, what do they have that I don't? Here's what most people assume. That person was born that way. That confidence is a personality trait that some people simply drew a better hand, got lucky with their genes, their upbringing, their circumstances. And if you weren't born with it, you're left to fake it, to perform it, to wear it like a costume that never quite fits right. That assumption is wrong, and this video is going to prove it. What you're about to learn isn't motivation. It isn't a pep talk. It's science. It's the actual biological mechanism that determines why some people move through life with certainty while others stay paralyzed in fear, self-doubt, and hesitation. More importantly, it's the exact process by which anyone, including you, can permanently change that. Not temporarily, not just when you're feeling good or the conditions are right, permanently at the level of your brain itself. Your brain is not fixed. The thoughts you think most often, the beliefs you hold about yourself, the patterns you repeat day after day, they are not locked in. They are the result of a process called neuroplasticity. And that same process that built the version of you that doubts, hesitates, and holds back is the exact same process that can build a version of you that doesn't. The brain that was wired against you can be rewired for you. That is not a metaphor. That is neuroscience. Stay with this because what comes next is going to change the way you see your own mind forever. Chapter 1. The Silent Epidemic. Why confident people were built, not born. Think about the single area of your life where you feel the least confident. It might be your career. It might be the way you handle relationships. It might be speaking in front of people, asserting yourself in a room. Going after something you want without immediately talking yourself out of it. Whatever it is, there's a voice that shows up in those moments. A voice that knows exactly what to say to stop you. And the terrifying thing is that voice sounds like you. It uses your words. It speaks in your tone. It references your history. It feels like truth because it sounds exactly like your own inner dialogue. But it isn't truth. It's programming. And it was installed in you long before you had any say in the matter. Here's something the vast majority of people never realize about confidence. The people who seem to have it effortlessly aren't running on some special internal fuel you lack. They're not braver, not more deserving, not more capable in any fundamental way. What's different is what their brain has been trained to believe. Confidence is not a feeling that arrives before you act. It's a neural pattern that gets strengthened every time you act in spite of how you feel. The people you look at and envy for their boldness didn't start there. They built it, usually without even knowing they were doing it. Through repeated exposure, repeated action, and repeated experience that slowly but irreversibly rewired their brain to see risk as manageable, discomfort as temporary, and themselves as capable. That process can be done deliberately. That's the entire point of what you're watching right now. The brutal truth that almost nobody will say out loud is this. Most people who lack confidence aren't lacking it because of who they are. They're lacking it because of what they were taught to believe about who they are. And those beliefs weren't chosen. They were absorbed from parents who were themselves afraid. From environments that punished failure instead of teaching resilience. From social systems that rewarded compliance and punished anyone who dared take up too much space. From 10,000 small moments, none of which seemed significant at the time, that quietly stacked into a subconscious architecture of self-limitation. You did not build that architecture, but you are living inside it. And unless you do something about it, you will keep living inside it, making choices that reflect its limitations rather than your actual potential for the rest of your life. Now, here's where it gets important. The reason most people never change, even when they desperately want to, is not a lack of desire. It's not laziness. It's not weakness of character. It's that they try to change their confidence from the outside in. They try to think their way to it, force it, perform it, read enough about it that it somehow materializes. And when it doesn't stick, they conclude the same thing, that they just weren't born with it, that it isn't for them. But confidence isn't built through insight alone. It isn't built through motivation or positive thinking or telling yourself enough times that you can do something. It's built through the systematic rewiring of the neural pathways that govern how your brain interprets you, your potential, your place in the world, and the risks in front of you. And that rewiring follows specific principles, each of which you are going to understand completely before this video is over. Every major breakthrough you have ever had in your life, every time you took a leap, showed up for something that scared you, said yes. When your gut told you to say no to fear, came from a moment when you believed in yourself enough to act. Even if it was just barely, even if the doubt was screaming at you, somewhere in that moment, something in you overrode the program long enough to move forward. And afterward, something shifted slightly. The thing you feared wasn't as catastrophic as you expected. Your brain updated its file. The next time, marginally less resistance. That's not an accident. That's neuroplasticity. And you've already experienced it without knowing what it was. Now you're going to learn how to do it deliberately, systematically, and at a scale that produces real, permanent change. Because confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. And the building starts by understanding exactly what is currently standing in your way. Chapter 2, The Hidden Architecture. Understanding the two minds running your life. Right now as you watch this, the vast majority of your mental activity is happening somewhere you cannot directly observe. Decisions are being processed. Emotional reactions are being queued up. Interpretations of everything around you are being filtered, sorted, and handed back to your conscious awareness as if they were simply reality. But they're not reality. They're the output of a system you've never been formally introduced to. And that system is running your life far more than you realize. Your mind operates on two distinct levels. And understanding the difference between them is the foundation of everything else in this video. The first level is your conscious mind. This is the part you identify with. It's where your deliberate thoughts happen. Where you plan, reason, decide, analyze, and reflect. When you're aware of something, when you're thinking about what to say in a conversation or weighing two choices or reading these words right now, that's your conscious mind at work. Here's the problem. Your conscious mind accounts for roughly 5% of your total mental activity on any given day. 5%. It feels like it's in charge. It feels like the CEO, but it is not. It is the face of the operation, the part that deals with the public, the actual decision-making, the deep programming, the core beliefs that shape every reaction you have to life. Those live somewhere else entirely. The second level is your subconscious mind. And this is where everything that actually determines the quality of your life is stored and operated. Your subconscious is responsible for approximately 95% of your thoughts, decisions, habits, and emotional responses on any given day. It controls your automatic reactions to people. It processes the tone of someone's voice and decides within milliseconds whether to feel safe or threatened, open or defensive. It holds the beliefs you formed about yourself as a child and continues to use them as the operating manual for your adult life. It determines whether you hesitate or act, whether you see an opportunity or a threat, whether you feel worthy or inadequate in any given moment. And here's the part that most people don't understand. Your subconscious doesn't operate on logic. It doesn't respond to what's true. It responds to what is familiar, to what has been repeated, to what has been reinforced over time with emotion and consistency. That is how it decides what's real, what's possible, what's safe, and what you are. Think of your mind like a car. Your conscious mind is the driver. It decides where it wants to go. It sets a destination and points itself in a direction. But your subconscious is the engine, the GPS, and the road itself. It controls the speed, the actual direction of movement, and whether the car moves at all. And if your subconscious has been programmed with a set of directions that say this road leads to danger, every time your conscious mind tries to drive toward confidence, toward risk, toward growth, the engine quietly redirects you back to where you came from. This is why you can decide genuinely and with full conviction that you're going to be more confident, more assertive, more willing to take risks, and then find yourself a week later doing exactly what you've always done. Not because you lied to yourself, not because you aren't capable, but because your conscious decision never reached the level where change actually happens. You spoke to the driver, but the GPS still had the old route loaded, and it will keep loading that route until you change the programming. Your subconscious doesn't just run your automatic habits and emotional reactions either. It also controls how you perceive reality itself. There is a region in your brain called the reticular activating system, and its job is to decide what information from the external world reaches your conscious awareness. Right now there are millions of pieces of sensory data available to your brain: sounds, visual details, background conversations, physical sensations, peripheral movement. Your brain cannot process all of it, so your reticular activating system filters it. It decides what's relevant and what isn't. And the criteria it uses to make that decision is whatever your subconscious believes is important, expected, or aligned with its existing view of reality. If you subconsciously believe you are the kind of person opportunities don't come to, your reticular activating system will literally filter out evidence to the contrary. It won't look like you're blocking success. It will just look like nothing good is happening. The opportunities that other people see will be invisible to you, not because they aren't there, but because your internal filter has decided they aren't relevant to someone like you. The same mechanism that makes you suddenly notice your car model everywhere after you buy it is the same mechanism that either opens or closes your perception to the life you want. And it's controlled entirely by what your subconscious believes. This is not a small thing. This means your internal programming doesn't just affect how you feel. It affects what you literally see and don't see in the world around you. Two people can walk into the same room, the same meeting, the same set of circumstances, and one will see potential and possibility while the other sees threat and inadequacy. The difference isn't intelligence. It isn't luck. It's the filter through which reality is being processed. And that filter is set by the subconscious mind. Now, here's what this means for you. You have been walking through life using a filter that was set by someone else. Your parents, your teachers, the experiences that happened to you before you were old enough to evaluate them. The opinions of people who themselves were running on their own outdated inherited programming. That filter has been deciding what you see, what you reach for, what you believe is possible for you every single day without your permission, without your conscious awareness. And until you actively change it, it will keep deciding for you. The good news, the extraordinary life-altering good news, is that filter is not permanent. The subconscious is not a fixed sealed system. It is designed to update, to adapt, to rewire. And the process by which it does that is something you are about to understand completely. Chapter 3. Neuroplasticity. The scientific proof that you can change. For most of human history, scientists believed that the adult brain was essentially finished. That the architecture you arrived at in your early years was the architecture you were stuck with. That personality, belief, and emotional patterns hardened over time like cement, and that by adulthood the structure was set. Change was considered possible only at the surface level. New behaviors could be adopted. But the underlying wiring that drove those behaviors was believed to be permanent. That belief has been definitively overturned. And what replaced it is one of the most important discoveries in the history of neuroscience. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to physically reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout your entire life. Not just in childhood, not just in a recovery from injury. Every single day, in response to your thoughts, your experiences, your habits, and your emotions, your brain is physically changing its structure. Neurons that fire together wire together. This isn't a motivational slogan. It is a biological law. The more frequently a particular thought, behavior, or emotional response is repeated, the stronger the neural pathway associated with it becomes. The stronger that pathway, the more automatically your brain travels it. And the more automatically it travels it, the more that pathway defines who you are and how you show up in the world. This is how confidence was built in the people who appear to have it naturally. It wasn't given to them. It was wired into them through repetition, through environments that rewarded bold action, through experiences of overcoming adversity, through years of moving through fear and accumulating evidence that they could handle whatever came. Their neural pathways for confidence didn't appear from nowhere. They were built and strengthened, experience by experience, just as yours were built by a different kind of repetition in a different direction. And here is the crucial implication. If neural pathways for self-doubt were built through repetition, they can be weakened through disuse and replaced through a different kind of repetition. Every time you avoid a situation that challenges you, the pathway for avoidance strengthens. Every time you take action in spite of your fear, you begin constructing a new pathway, one associated with capability, resilience, and forward movement. The old pathway doesn't disappear instantly. For a while, both exist. You'll feel the pull of the old pattern even as you begin building the new one. But this is exactly why change feels hard at first and gradually becomes easier. The discomfort you feel when you push against your old mental programming is not a signal that you can't change. It is the literal sensation of new neural construction happening inside your brain. Consider what happens when you learn to drive. At first, every element of it demands your full conscious attention. The mirrors, the pedals, the steering, the distance to other cars, the speed, the lanes. Your brain is working at maximum conscious capacity just to keep you on the road. But after months of practice, something shifts. Driving becomes automatic. You can hold a conversation, listen to music, think about your day, and still navigate complex traffic without consciously attending to every micro decision involved. What changed? Not your awareness, not your intelligence, not some mysterious increase in skill. Your brain built neural pathways for driving so strong that they no longer required conscious supervision. The behavior moved from the conscious mind into the automatic subconscious architecture. This is precisely how confidence works right now. Self-doubt, hesitation, and avoidance are automatic for you. They don't require effort. They just happen because the neural pathways for those responses have been reinforced for years and are now the default route your brain takes. Building confidence requires building competing pathways through repetition, through action, through new emotional experiences until those new pathways become strong enough to compete with the old ones. And then gradually stronger than the old ones. And then one day the default, not something you have to consciously manufacture, simply who you are. There is something else about neuroplasticity that is absolutely essential to understand. And it directly determines how fast this rewiring process happens. The brain doesn't just respond to physical experiences. It responds to mental rehearsal with nearly identical neural activity. When you vividly imagine an experience, the same neural circuits fire as when you actually have that experience. Athletes have used this for decades. A basketball player who mentally rehearses free throws activates the same motor neurons as one who physically practices them. The brain at the neural level does not fully distinguish between something vividly imagined and something actually experienced. This means that visualization done properly and with genuine emotional intensity is not wishful thinking. It is a neurological training method. Every time you clearly and emotionally imagine yourself acting with confidence, walking into a room with certainty, speaking without hesitation, making a decision without second-guessing it, your brain is building the neural foundation for exactly that behavior. The mental rehearsal and the physical rehearsal are both doing real work at the biological level. But there is a catch. Neuroplasticity requires the right inputs to work in your favor. Repetition alone is not enough. Your brain also responds to emotional intensity. The more emotionally charged an experience is, whether positive or negative, the more deeply it is encoded in your neural architecture. This is why a single traumatic experience can create a pattern that lasts decades. The emotional charge around the event made the neural pathway unusually deep and durable. The same principle works in the other direction. If you can attach strong, genuine positive emotion to new beliefs and new behaviors, they encode faster and more durably than neutral repetition alone. This is the science behind what you are going to learn. Not affirmations, muttered half-heartedly in a bathroom mirror. Not motivated moments that fade by the following Tuesday. A systematic neuroscience-backed process that works with the physical nature of your brain rather than against it to permanently install a different way of operating. Not a better mood, not a temporary boost, a rewired brain, a different default, a version of you that doesn't have to fight for confidence because confidence has become the neural path of least resistance. The only question is whether you are willing to do what it actually takes to build it. Chapter 4. How you were programmed against yourself before you even knew it. You did not choose your first beliefs. You did not sit down at any point in your early life, review the available options, and decide, I will believe I am not enough. I will believe risk is dangerous. I will believe that speaking up for myself leads to rejection. I will believe that success is for other people. None of that was a choice. It was an installation. And it happened at a level of your development when your brain had no firewall, no critical filter, no mechanism to evaluate what was being loaded into it. From birth until approximately age 7, the human brain operates primarily in a brainwave state called theta. If you're familiar with meditation, theta is the state people work hard to access in adulthood. It's the deeply receptive state right at the threshold of sleep where the subconscious mind is most open and impressionable. A child's waking brain spends the majority of its first 7 years in this state. Which means that a child isn't experiencing the world and then reasoning about it. A child is downloading the world directly into the subconscious without any critical filter whatsoever as raw programming. Everything your parents said to you in those years, their tone of voice when you made mistakes, the things they praised and the things they punished, the way they handled conflict, money, failure, uncertainty, all of it was being loaded directly into your subconscious as core belief, not as information you could evaluate, as truth about how the world works and who you are within it. If you were raised in an environment where you were frequently affirmed, where bold action was celebrated, where failure was treated as part of learning, your subconscious received programming that said, I am capable. The world is manageable, risk is worth it, I belong. And that programming became the foundation that confidence is built on. But if your environment communicated something different, if love felt conditional, if failure was met with punishment or shame, if ambition was treated with suspicion, if you were told directly or indirectly that you weren't smart enough, talented enough, worthy enough, your subconscious received that instead, not as one person's opinion, as fact, as the operating system for how you interpret yourself in every situation you encounter for the rest of your life. And it doesn't require overt trauma. That's what makes this so pervasive. It doesn't require an abusive household or dramatic events. A single moment of humiliation in front of a class can create a neural pathway connecting public speaking with danger that persists for decades. A parent who with entirely good intentions consistently stepped in to manage every difficulty instead of letting you work through it, unknowingly installed the belief that you cannot handle challenges on your own. A culture that constantly signaled that your worth was tied to performance, achievement, or external approval quietly programmed you to evaluate your value based on outcomes rather than inherent worth. None of these had to be dramatic. Repetition and emotional charge were enough. And childhood is full of both. Here is what makes this even more insidious. Once a belief is installed, your brain does not operate neutrally toward it. It actively seeks to confirm it. This is called confirmation bias. And it is one of the most powerful forces shaping human perception. Your brain is not designed to show you reality objectively. It is designed to show you the reality that matches what it already believes. So if your subconscious holds the belief that you are not good enough, your brain will focus disproportionately on every piece of evidence that supports that belief. Every failure, every rejection, every uncomfortable silence in a conversation. Every time you compared yourself to someone more successful while simultaneously filtering out, minimizing or rationalizing away everything that contradicts it, you could have a 100 successes and 5 failures. And if you carry the deep belief that you are not adequate, your brain will build its case primarily on those 5 failures. The 100 successes will feel like luck, flukes, exceptions that don't really count. This is not pessimism. This is not low self-esteem as a character flaw. This is your neural architecture doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect its own consistency. A brain that believes you are not capable needs to maintain that belief to stay coherent, and it will relentlessly unless you actively intervene. There is another dimension to this that runs even deeper. Many of the beliefs you carry were not even formed from your own experiences. They were absorbed directly from the people around you. You watched your parents react to uncertainty, and your subconscious filed their reaction as the correct way to respond to uncertainty. You heard the repeated messages of your culture about who succeeds and who doesn't, about what kind of person earns love, about what failure means, about someone's worth. And your subconscious indexed those messages as truth before you were old enough to question them. The beliefs that are most silently controlling your life right now may have nothing to do with anything that ever actually happened to you. They may be secondhand programs from people who were themselves running secondhand programs from the generation before them. And here is perhaps the most important thing in this entire chapter. Those beliefs are not you. They feel like you. They speak in your voice, use your history as evidence, and have been operating from inside your mind for so long that they feel like your own thoughts. But they are not truth. They are not permanent. They are mental programs. They were installed through a specific process, and they can be uninstalled and replaced through a specific process. A different one, a deliberate one that you are in complete control of. But before you can run that process, you need to understand why your brain fights it so hard. Because as soon as you try to change these deeply held programs, something in you is going to resist with everything it has. Not because change is impossible, but because of something that is already happening below the surface of every attempt at growth you have ever made. Chapter 5. The War Inside You. Why Your Conscious Mind Almost Always Loses. Have you ever made a genuine serious decision to change something about yourself and then watched it fall apart within days? Have you ever committed to a new level of boldness, a new standard of self-belief, a new approach to taking risks, only to find yourself 2 weeks later exactly where you started, somehow back in the same hesitation, the same avoidance, the same quiet defeat, and then blamed yourself for it? Called it a lack of discipline. Called it proof that you can't change. Used it as more evidence against yourself. What if that pattern of falling back wasn't a character failure? What if it was something much more specific, much more mechanical, and much more fixable? Here is what is actually happening. Every time you try to change and feel the pull back toward your old patterns, your subconscious mind has one overriding directive that supersedes everything else, including your conscious desires, your logic, your goals, your best intentions. That directive is keep you safe. And to your subconscious, safe means familiar, not good, not fulfilling, not aligned with your potential. Familiar. Whatever has been your pattern long enough to feel normal, that is what your subconscious defines as safe. And anything that deviates from that pattern, even if it is objectively better for you, even if it is clearly aligned with what you want, even if it is something you have consciously chosen and deeply want to pursue, registers to your subconscious as a potential threat. Your subconscious doesn't evaluate whether the unfamiliar thing is actually dangerous. It evaluates only whether it is unfamiliar. And if it is, it activates resistance. That resistance shows up in very specific, recognizable forms. And until you know what you're looking at, it will keep working on you invisibly. The first form is procrastination. When your subconscious is threatened by something you're about to do, something that could expose you to judgment, to failure, to rejection, to being seen. It doesn't tell you to stop directly. It tells you to do it later. Later is safer because later never arrives. Procrastination isn't laziness. It is fear that has learned to disguise itself as a schedule conflict. The task feels heavy, resistant, weirdly difficult to start. Not because it's beyond your capability, but because starting it means moving towards something your subconscious has flagged as unsafe. And the longer you delay, the stronger the neural pathway for avoidance becomes and the heavier the task feels. It is a self-reinforcing trap, and the only way out is to recognize it for what it is. Not a reflection of your readiness or your capability, but a reflex, a protective reflex that is protecting you from growth. The second form is overthinking. The mind becomes extraordinarily busy the moment you try to do something that your subconscious finds threatening. It generates objections, complications, alternative scenarios, worst-case analyses, questions you couldn't possibly have answered yet. It gives you the sensation of being diligent, thorough, responsible. When in reality, it is creating a fog so dense that action becomes impossible. Overthinking is your subconscious manufacturing inertia. It is the appearance of progress with none of the movement. Strategic thinkers know that no amount of planning produces the information that action does. The only way to find out if something works is to do it. And the paralysis of endless analysis is not wisdom. It is fear. Wearing a suit. The third form is self-doubt. And this one goes deepest because it attacks at the identity level. Self-doubt doesn't just tell you that a particular action might not work out. It tells you that you, specifically the person about to take that action, are not capable of it, that you don't have what it takes, that others could pull it off. But you can't. Self-doubt is your subconscious protecting your current identity. Because your subconscious doesn't just maintain habits, it maintains a coherent self-image. And if your self-image is built around being someone who hesitates, who stays in the background, who plays it safe, then any attempt to act like a different kind of person registers as a threat to the coherence of who you are. The subconscious will generate self-doubt to stop you from doing something that contradicts the identity it has been managing for years. This is why the battle between who you want to be and who you have been feels so visceral and so exhausting. You are not simply trying to adopt new behaviors. You are attempting to threaten the identity your subconscious has been built to protect. And your subconscious will fight that with procrastination, overthinking, self-doubt, anxiety, emotional volatility, and every other weapon in its arsenal. Not because it is malicious, but because coherence of identity is a survival mechanism. A mind that is fragmented and inconsistent cannot make fast, reliable decisions in a world that requires them. Your subconscious protects the identity it has in order to maintain function. It doesn't know that the identity it's protecting is built on false programming. It only knows that it's the one it has, and it will defend it. This is also why the approach of simply repeating positive affirmations to yourself without addressing the underlying programming rarely produces lasting change. You can tell yourself you are confident 1,000 times a day. But if your subconscious is still running the program that says you are not, it will dismiss every affirmation as noise and continue operating on its original code. The affirmation never reached the level where it needed to make an impact. It stayed in the 5% conscious layer while the 95% subconscious kept running business as usual. So if conscious willpower alone can't win this war, what actually works to override the subconscious resistance and rewire the programs that have been running your life? This is exactly what the next part of this video is going to answer in complete and precise detail. Because once you understand how the subconscious learns, how it updates, how it actually accepts and internalizes new programming, you stop fighting it. You stop trying to overpower it with your conscious mind. Instead, you learn to speak its language. You work with how it actually operates rather than how you wish it did. And when you do that, the resistance that has stopped you every time before dissolves. Not because the subconscious gave up, but because you stopped speaking a language it couldn't hear and started speaking one it couldn't ignore. The rewiring process is specific. It is methodical, and it is far more powerful than anything you have tried before. But you have to understand the problem fully before you can apply the solution effectively. And now you do. There is one more thing to understand about the war inside you before we move forward. And it is perhaps the most clarifying piece of everything discussed in this chapter. The subconscious is not opposing you because it is broken. It is not a malfunction. The resistance you feel, the pull toward familiarity, the automatic hesitation, the self-doubt that arrives right when you need it. Least all of it is a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was designed to protect consistency, to keep you inside the boundaries of what it knows, to prevent the cognitive chaos that comes from a mind that's constantly rewriting its own rules. The problem is not the mechanism. The problem is the data that was fed into it. A security system running on faulty threat data will guard the wrong things. It will treat opportunities as intruders and treat stagnation as safety. That is what is happening inside you. Not a broken system, but an accurate system running on inaccurate information. Information that was fed into it before you could evaluate it. Information that told you in 100 different ways across 1,000 different moments that you were not the kind of person who could do this, whatever this is for you, and that is why willpower alone will never be enough. You cannot outmuscle a security system with conviction. You have to update the threat data. You have to replace the false programming with true programming consistently, emotionally, and through action until the system recalibrates and starts protecting the right things. Your growth, your potential, your willingness to act, your right to take up space in the world without apology. That is what rewiring your brain for confidence actually means. Not waking up one morning suddenly feeling fearless. Not suppressing your doubts or performing certainty you don't feel. It means changing what your brain does automatically at the level below conscious thought. So that confidence is no longer something you have to fight for. It becomes something that simply happens. The way hesitation used to simply happen. The neural path of least resistance. The default. The reflex. The chapters ahead are going to show you exactly how to get there. Not through inspiration, through science. Chapter 6, The 3 Pillars of Rewiring. Exposure, repetition, and emotional intensity. Everything you've learned so far has been building toward this moment. You understand that your subconscious mind runs the show. You understand that it was programmed before you could evaluate what was being installed. You understand that it resists change not out of malice, but out of an obsessive commitment to keeping things familiar. You understand that the brain is neuroplastic, that it physically changes in response to experience and repetition. Now, it's time to get specific, because knowing that change is possible and knowing how to produce it are two completely different things. There are 3 foundational principles that govern how the subconscious mind learns, updates, and permanently rewires itself. Every technique you will encounter for building confidence, for shifting your identity, for breaking limiting beliefs, ultimately traces back to these 3 pillars. If a method works, it's because it's honoring one or more of them. If something hasn't worked for you in the past, it's because it was missing one. These are not suggestions. They are the operating conditions of the human brain. Learn them and you will understand exactly why some of your old attempts failed and exactly what to do differently going forward. The first pillar is exposure. Your subconscious forms its beliefs about reality based on what it sees most consistently. Not what happens once, not what you're told once. What is repeated regularly with enough frequency that the subconscious begins to treat it as the expected norm. This is the same mechanism by which your old programming was built. You were surrounded over and over by an environment that communicated certain things about who you were and what was possible for you, and your subconscious accepted those things as the baseline reality. Not because they were necessarily true, but because they were the most commonly presented input. The subconscious doesn't vote on what to believe. It tallies what it sees most, and it believes that. This means that if you want to rewire toward confidence, you must deliberately flood your environment and your mental diet with inputs that normalize confidence, success, and boldness. The people you spend the most time around, the content you consume, the conversations you allow into your life, the internal monologue you permit to run unchecked. All of it is either reinforcing the old program or installing a new one. There is no neutral consumption. Everything you expose your mind to is a vote cast to your subconscious about what reality is and what you are capable of. Choose those votes with intention. Surround yourself with evidence of the life you are building, not the life you are leaving behind. Let your subconscious see confidence so consistently that it begins to register it as the new baseline. As familiar as what it needs to protect and maintain. The second pillar is repetition. Your subconscious does not update on the strength of a single encounter. It updates on the strength of a pattern. This is the fundamental reason why one good speech, one powerful book, one transformative weekend event, one moment of genuine inspiration rarely produces lasting change on its own. The emotional peak of that experience creates a temporary shift. But within days or weeks, the old neural pathways built over years of repetition reassert themselves. They are simply stronger because they have been reinforced far more times. The new pattern hasn't had a chance to compete yet. The only way to make a new belief or behavior dominant in your subconscious is to repeat it consistently daily without exception until the neural pathway it's building becomes as strong as or stronger than the old one it's competing against. Repetition is what separates a passing thought from a core belief. Repetition is what separates a behavior you tried a few times from a behavior that becomes your automatic default. There is no shortcut. There is no method powerful enough to substitute for this. But here's what makes repetition manageable. It does not require massive dramatic action every single day. Small consistent actions executed daily over weeks and months compound in exactly the same way that interest compounds in a bank account. A 1% improvement repeated daily produces a return that most people dramatically underestimate. The brain doesn't need to be overwhelmed to rewire. It needs to be consistently nudged in the new direction until that direction becomes its default route. The third pillar is emotional intensity. This is the one most people never use correctly, and it is the one that determines the speed of everything. Your subconscious does not store all experiences equally. It prioritizes experiences based on the emotional charge they carry. A moment of intense embarrassment in childhood left a mark that can last decades. A moment of profound joy, genuine awe, or deep pride can shift the texture of who you believe yourself to be within minutes. Emotion is the volume knob on the subconscious learning system. The more emotionally charged an input is, the more deeply and quickly it encodes. This is why logical affirmations said flatly in front of a mirror with no feeling behind them rarely produce meaningful results. The words are present, the emotion is absent, and the subconscious responds to emotion, not words. When you attach genuine visceral physical emotion to a new belief, when you feel it in your body rather than just think it in your head, the encoding speed increases dramatically. Your brain marks that experience as significant as something worth paying attention to, as something worth building new architecture around. These three pillars, exposure, repetition, and emotional intensity, are the tools of deliberate subconscious reprogramming. Everything that follows in this video is a specific application of these three principles to the specific challenge of building unshakable permanent confidence. Each technique you're about to learn is effective precisely because it activates one or more of these pillars in a specific targeted way. Understand why it works, not just what to do, and you will be able to apply it far more powerfully. Because the most important thing you can bring to any practice is intentionality. Knowing what you are doing and why it works means you do it with the full weight of belief behind it. And as you are about to discover, belief is not just a nice addition to the rewiring process. It is the fuel that makes the entire process run. There is also a fourth element that sits beneath the three pillars and amplifies all of them. Environment design. Most people try to change their thinking while keeping everything around them exactly the same. The same friends who reinforce the old self-image. The same consumption habits that confirm the old story. The same daily routines that leave no room for the new pattern to take root. The subconscious is extraordinarily sensitive to environmental cues. It reads the world around you as additional data about what is normal, what is expected, what belongs to you and what doesn't. If your environment is built around the old version of you, it will quietly and persistently pull you back toward that version. Even as your mind tries to move forward, changing your environment is not a luxury. It is a fundamental component of the rewiring process. You need to deliberately architect the world around you to reflect the reality you are building. This does not require drastic or expensive changes. It requires intention. What books are sitting on your table? What do the first 15 minutes of your morning look like? What voices are you allowing into your mind through what you listen to, watch, and read? Who are the people you spend the most unstructured time with? And what does their presence communicate to your subconscious about what is normal and possible? Each of these is an exposure input. Each of them is either voting for the old program or voting for the new one. Design your environment to vote consistently for the new one. Make the inputs that reinforce your evolving identity the most common, the most accessible, the most frequently encountered, and remove as much as you practically can the inputs that continue to validate the old story. You do not have to burn your life down to redesign your mental environment. You simply have to start making deliberate choices about what you allow to be a consistent presence in it. Because your subconscious is always taking notes. The question is only whether you are the one deciding what it sees. Chapter 7. Affirmations done right. Why? What you've been saying isn't working. There is a reason affirmations have developed a reputation problem. Most people have tried them. Most people have stood in front of a mirror or repeated statements in their head or written things like "I am confident" or "I am worthy" or "I am enough" in a notebook. And most people have noticed very little change as a result. So they conclude that affirmations don't work, that it's wishful thinking, that the whole idea is soft, unscientific, something designed for people who prefer positive feelings over real results, but the conclusion is wrong. The failure isn't the concept, it's the execution. And once you understand exactly why most affirmations fail to reach the subconscious, you will also understand exactly how to make them work and why, when done correctly, they are one of the most neurologically legitimate tools available to you. Here is the core problem. Your subconscious does not accept statements as true simply because you say them. If it did, you would have programmed yourself to believe all kinds of things by now, just through casual conversation. The subconscious has a truth filter. It cross-references incoming statements against what it already believes to be true based on all previous evidence. And if the incoming statement is too far outside of what it currently believes, it doesn't update. It rejects. It treats the statement as noise, as something your conscious mind is generating that has no grounding in the established evidence base. This is why someone who has spent decades reinforcing the belief that they are not good enough cannot simply say "I am good enough" 100 times and expect that belief to crumble. The subconscious has a mountain of accumulated evidence to the contrary. Evidence it has been curating through confirmation bias for years, and 100 repetitions of a contradictory statement doesn't overcome that mountain. It's not even close. The gap between what you're saying and what your subconscious believes is too large. The statement bounces off. So what actually closes that gap? 3 things, all of which map back to the pillars from the previous chapter. The first is emotional embodiment. When you say an affirmation, your job is not to produce words. Your job is to produce the feeling state that would exist if the statement were already true. This is the critical distinction that almost everyone misses. Don't say "I am confident" as a statement you're trying to convince yourself of. Say "I am confident" while physically generating in your body the sensation of what confidence actually feels like. What does it feel like in your chest, in your posture, in your breath, in your face? What physical state do you experience when you feel genuinely certain about something? Reproduce that physical state deliberately as you affirm. Stand differently, breathe differently. Let the statement not be a hope but a declaration that your body is simultaneously ratifying. Your subconscious doesn't listen primarily to your words. It listens to the emotional physiological signals your body is generating. When those signals align with the statement, the encoding is exponentially more powerful. The second is specificity. Generic affirmations are weak precisely because they are generic. I am confident is a statement your subconscious can dismiss in 10 directions at once. But I am the kind of person who speaks first in a room and owns every word of it is a specific behavioral identity level statement that your subconscious has to work a little harder to flat out reject because it's not asking for global agreement. It's describing a specific person doing a specific thing. Specific affirmations build specific neural pathways. They are more concrete, more actionable, and more difficult to wholesale dismiss. The more specific and detailed your affirmations, the more direct the neural pathway being constructed. The third is bridging. Rather than leaping directly from what you currently believe to what you want to believe, which creates the rejection response described earlier, bridge toward it in a way the subconscious can accept. Instead of saying, I am completely confident right now, when your subconscious knows that isn't true and will reject the statement on those grounds. Say something like, I am becoming more confident with every action I take, or I have proven to myself before that I can do hard things and I am doing it again. These statements are true. Your subconscious cannot reject them because they accurately represent reality, and from there they serve as stepping stones moving your subconscious closer to the bolder unconditional statement you are building toward. Affirmations also work exponentially better when they are anchored in a specific daily routine. Not said randomly when you happen to remember them, but spoken at the same time every day. Ideally, at moments when your brain is naturally in a more receptive state, such as first thing in the morning before your day has filled your mind with other priorities, or last thing at night before sleep, when the threshold between your conscious and subconscious mind is thinnest. These windows are not arbitrary. They are neurologically privileged moments when your subconscious is most accessible and most open to new input. And here is the final piece of the affirmation formula that almost no one tells you. Coupling them with action. Every time you state a belief about who you are and then immediately take even a small action that is consistent with that belief, you generate evidence. And evidence is what the subconscious actually responds to. You can say I am confident all you want. But the moment you say it and then do one thing, anything, a small thing that a confident person would do, the subconscious receives proof, not just words anymore. Data and data stacks. With enough stacked data, the needle of your subconscious belief begins to move in a direction no amount of words alone could have moved it. The reason affirmations don't work for most people is that they stay at the word level and never reach the body level, the specificity level, the action level, or the consistency level. Get all of those right, and you are no longer using affirmations as a motivational exercise. You are using them as a neuroscience-backed installation protocol for a new self-concept. And that is something the subconscious cannot ignore. Chapter 8. The Visualization Method. How to train your brain without leaving your room. Elite athletes have known this for decades. The research has confirmed it so thoroughly that it is now standard practice at the highest levels of competition in virtually every sport, performance field, and high-stakes profession in the world. Visualization is not a motivational tool. It is a training tool, a neurological training tool. And when used with precision and understanding, it is one of the fastest ways to build the brain architecture of confidence without needing to wait for the right external circumstances to create the experience for you. Here is the neuroscience that makes this possible. When you vividly imagine performing an action, whether it's giving a speech, walking into a room with authority, having a difficult conversation with calm certainty, making a bold decision without second guessing, or any other behavior you associate with confidence, your brain activates the same neural circuits as it would if you were actually doing it. Not similar circuits, the same ones. The brain operating on its internal imagery cannot fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a lived one at the level of neural firing. This is not metaphor or inspiration. It is a measurable, documented neurological fact. What this means is that every time you clearly and emotionally visualize yourself acting with confidence, You are at the neural level doing the equivalent of a practice repetition. You are firing and reinforcing the neural pathways associated with confident behavior. You are building the brain architecture of confidence even in the absence of the external situation that would normally produce it. You are getting reps in environments that don't yet exist. You are training the version of you that you are becoming before that version of you has a chance to show up in the real world. This is why visualization produces such remarkable results. When combined with physical practice, the brain cannot tell the difference between the two in terms of neural activation. So the combined volume of real plus imagined repetitions produces a speed of neural pathway development that neither alone can match. You are essentially doubling, tripling, quadrupling your practice volume with no additional external exposure required. But here is where most people go wrong with visualization and why it often feels like passive daydreaming rather than genuine training. The quality of the visualization is everything. Vague mental images of success, wispy impressions of yourself doing well, general feelings of things going right do almost nothing. They are too thin, too non-specific, too emotionally flat to generate meaningful neural activity. The brain responds to rich detailed multi-sensory imagery delivered with genuine emotional engagement. Anything less is not really visualization in the neuroscientific sense. It's wishful thinking in a slightly quieter voice. Effective visualization has a specific texture to it. You must be in the scene, not watching yourself from the outside. You must see through your own eyes what you would actually see in that moment. The room, the people in it, the expression on their faces as you speak, the way the light falls, the texture of the chair beneath you, the sound of your own voice, steady and clear, filling the space with authority. And you must generate the feeling in your chest when you speak without hesitation. The warmth in your body when you finish a conversation and know you showed up exactly as you intended. The steady settled sense of certainty that you are capable of handling this and anything like it. That feeling is not decoration. That feeling is the primary training signal. It is what tells your brain this matters. This is real. This is worth encoding. Begin your visualization practice by choosing one specific scenario that currently represents a challenge to your confidence. Not everything at once. One thing. Maybe it's initiating a conversation with someone you find intimidating. Maybe it's speaking in a group setting without shrinking. Maybe it's setting a boundary with someone who has historically made that feel impossible. Take that one scenario and build it in full detail inside your mind every single day. See it from the inside. Generate the emotional state of someone for whom that scenario is effortless. Run through it from beginning to end. From the moment you enter to the moment you leave, feeling the confidence not as something you're performing but as something you naturally are. The brain requires context to build architecture efficiently. The more contextually specific your visualization, the more directly applicable the neural pathways it builds will be to the actual situation when it arrives. You are in the most literal sense pre-experiencing the confident version of yourself so thoroughly that when the real moment comes, your brain has already been there. It already has a file on this. It already has a pathway for this. It no longer treats the situation as unfamiliar and therefore no longer generates the full force of its threat response. The resistance drops because the familiarity is already there. Built in your imagination, translated into real neural architecture by a brain that doesn't care whether the input came from your eyes or your inner world. This is one of the most practical, accessible, and consistently underutilized tools available to anyone who wants to build confidence at the deepest level. You do not need to wait for enough money, enough opportunity, enough external permission or circumstance. You have inside your own mind a training environment that is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at zero cost. What you do with it depends entirely on whether you take it seriously enough to use it with the precision it deserves. Chapter 9: The Identity Shift. Becoming the person before you feel ready. There is a version of personal development that most people are familiar with. It goes like this. You identify what you want to be different about yourself. You set goals around it. You work at it consistently. And if you work hard enough and long enough, eventually you become the kind of person who achieves those goals. Progress first. Identity change is the result. That model is not wrong, but it is slow. And there is a version of it that is dramatically more powerful, more direct, and more aligned with how the subconscious actually works. It goes like this. You decide who you are first. You adopt the identity of the person you are building toward before your external results. Justify that identity. You operate from inside that identity, making decisions from it, speaking from it, carrying yourself as it. And then the behavior, the habits, the results follow the identity into existence rather than the other way around. This is not positive delusion. This is not pretending to have what you haven't yet built. This is the recognition of a fundamental principle of how the subconscious mind directs human behavior. Your subconscious does not simply record your actions and behaviors. It works relentlessly and automatically to keep you consistent with who it believes you are. It maintains behavioral coherence with your identity, which means that if you can change the identity your subconscious is trying to be coherent with, the behavior changes will follow far more naturally and automatically than if you are trying to force new behaviors while still holding an old self-concept. Think about how the old identity worked against you. If you have spent years identifying consciously or not as someone who is shy, someone who isn't good enough, someone who doubts before they act, someone to whom success doesn't naturally come, your subconscious has been working full-time to keep your behavior consistent with that self-image. It doesn't do this to punish you. It does this because behavioral coherence with identity is one of its core functions. A person who sees themselves as shy will unconsciously engineer situations that confirm that shyness. They will find reasons not to speak up. They will interpret social interactions through the lens of that self-concept. They will make 100 micro-decisions per day below the level of conscious awareness, each one slightly reinforcing the identity that the subconscious has been tasked with maintaining. This is why people who chronically struggle with the same issues often feel like no matter how hard they try, something keeps pulling them back. It's not fate, it's identity maintenance. Now reverse the mechanism. Decide that you are a confident person. Not that you are becoming one. Not that you are trying to be one, that you are one. Now before the full body of external evidence is in, start making decisions from that identity. When the opportunity arises to speak, ask, what would I say if I were the kind of person who doesn't second-guess themselves and then say it? When you face a situation that used to trigger your old avoidance patterns, ask, how does the version of me who is already confident handle this, and then handle it that way? Use the identity as a compass for each micro-decision. Not just the big dramatic ones, but the small daily almost invisible choices that accumulate into who you are. Here is what happens when you do this consistently. Your subconscious, which is constantly monitoring for consistency between your behavior and your identity, begins to register a pattern. The person I am maintaining is starting to behave differently. The behavior is more consistent with confidence than with self-doubt. The subconscious, which is not interested in arguing, simply begins updating. It starts holding the new behavioral pattern as the norm to maintain. And as it does, the neural pathways that support confident behavior strengthen. The old pathways no longer being consistently reinforced by behavior begin to weaken. This is the deepest form of rewiring because it operates at the source. Most attempts at change try to work from the behavior downward, forcing new actions and hoping the identity catches up. Identity shifting works from the self-concept downward, letting the identity lead the behavior rather than the other way around. It is faster because it works with the subconscious rather than against it. You are not fighting the maintenance function, you are redirecting it. There is a specific language shift that makes this practice concrete. Begin removing from your internal vocabulary all phrases that locate confidence in the future or position it as something you are working toward. Replace "I am trying to be more confident" with "I am a confident person still growing." Replace "I hope I can handle this" with "I handle what comes." Replace I am not really the kind of person who does this with I am exactly the kind of person who does this. The language is not a performance. It is instruction. You are issuing directives to your subconscious about who it is supposed to be coherent with. The more consistently and specifically you issue those directives in both your language and your behavior, the faster the subconscious updates. This is not a technique that asks you to ignore reality. Reality remains exactly what it is. What changes is the identity through which you navigate it. A confident identity doesn't mean you never feel fear or doubt. It means that fear and doubt are no longer the authority inside you. They are present, they are noted, and then the person you have decided to be moves forward anyway. That gap between what you feel and what you do is where identity is built. Fill that gap consistently and the identity becomes undeniable to yourself, to everyone around you, and most importantly to the subconscious that has been working to define you for as long as you can remember. Chapter 10. Exposure and the 5-second override. How to make your brain unafraid. You can do the internal work. You can do the visualization. You can recite the affirmations with emotional precision. You can shift your identity at the language level. All of that matters enormously. But there is something that none of it can fully replace. Action. Specific repeated targeted action in the face of the exact situations that currently trigger your fear, your avoidance, and your self-doubt. Not eventually, not when you feel ready. Now, and incrementally and consistently. Because the brain does not actually change its assessment of what is safe and what is dangerous based primarily on what you think about it. It changes its assessment based on what you do about it repeatedly and survive. This is the principle behind exposure therapy, and it is one of the most empirically validated mechanisms in all of psychology. The basic logic is elegant. Your subconscious has tagged a particular category of experience as dangerous. Not necessarily because it is dangerous, but because somewhere in your history, your brain encoded that type of experience as threatening, and the neural pathway for threat response in that context has been reinforced ever since. Every time you avoid the thing your subconscious has flagged, you do two things simultaneously. You get short-term relief from the discomfort of the threat response, and you long-term strengthen the association between that situation and danger. Avoidance feels like protection. It is actually the maintenance mechanism that keeps the fear permanently alive. Exposure breaks that mechanism. When you enter the feared situation and the catastrophe your subconscious predicted does not materialize, your brain receives direct evidence that its threat assessment was wrong, not just once. When you enter the feared situation repeatedly, encounter it again and again without the predicted catastrophe occurring, your brain does what it always does with repeated experience. It updates its neural pathway to reflect the accumulated data. The situation shifts gradually and then suddenly from dangerous to manageable. The threat response weakens. The automatic hesitation you used to feel begins to feel unnecessary because your brain now has a stacked body of evidence telling it this thing you used to run from does not actually harm you. Eventually the reflex stops firing at all. This is why confident people seem unafraid of things that terrify others. They are not built differently. They have accumulated more exposure to the types of situations that others have been avoiding. They have more data in their brain's threat assessment file on those situations. And the data says this is survivable. This is manageable. This is familiar. Their brain's response is calm, not because they are braver, but because their neural pathway for those situations has been revised by experience. The challenge is that exposure needs to be graduated to be effective. If you fear public speaking and you force yourself to give a keynote to 500 people as your first act of exposure, you will likely have such an intense threat response that the experience reinforces the fear rather than dismantling it. The intensity of the negative experience overrides the potential for positive neural updating. Instead, the exposure should begin where your anxiety is present but manageable and incrementally increase as your brain updates and the old response weakens. Speak in front of a mirror first, then one trusted person, then a small group, then larger. Each step produces neural updating. Each step makes the next step more accessible. The staircase is built one step at a time. And what feels impossible from the bottom of the staircase feels obvious from the middle of it. Now, here is the tool that makes exposure possible in the exact moments when the subconscious threat response is loudest. The 5-second rule. When you feel the resistance, the hesitation before speaking, the freeze before acting, the familiar pull towards staying quiet and safe, you have a 5-second window before your subconscious escalates that resistance into a full-blown avoidance response. Once the escalation happens, the brain floods your system with the hormones of the fight-or-flight response. Self-doubt spikes and the inertia of inaction takes over. You miss the moment, the window closes. But if the instant you feel the resistance, you count backward from 5 and take action before the count reaches 0. You interrupt that escalation before it completes. You bypass the hesitation reflex. You override the subconscious before it can assemble its full case for not moving. And what happens every time you do this, every single time you feel the resistance and move through it in 5 seconds, is that your brain records a new kind of data. I felt the fear. I moved anyway. Nothing catastrophic resulted. The association between action and danger weakens by exactly one data point. One rep, one small revision to the neural file on what this type of moment means and what this type of person does in response to it. The 5-second override is not a hack. It is a deliberate exploitation of the short window between the arrival of resistance and the full subconscious shutdown of momentum. And used consistently, it trains your brain to associate the feeling of resistance not with the signal to stop, but with the signal to count, to move, to go. Over time, the hesitation that once took you all the way to avoidance barely gets started before the new pattern kicks in. The new default becomes action. Not because the fear disappeared, but because you trained yourself to move before the fear could finish making its argument. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the consistent practiced choice to act while fear is present. And that choice made repeatedly across 100 different moments in a dozen different contexts with the full weight of exposure accumulating behind it does not just build a reputation for bravery. It builds a brain that is structurally and neurologically different from the one you started with. A brain that no longer generates the same threat response in situations that used to paralyze it. A brain that moves first and analyzes the aftermath rather than analyzing indefinitely and never moving at all. That is what you are building. One exposure at a time. One 5-second override at a time. One small undeniable piece of evidence at a time, stacking proof inside your own neural architecture that you are exactly the kind of person who does not stay behind the line. The accumulated effect of this of exposure layered on top of visualization layered on top of identity shift layered on top of emotionally charged affirmations layered on top of deliberate environmental design is not incremental. It is not linear. It is the kind of compounding that starts slowly and then accelerates to the point where the person looking back at their old patterns barely recognizes who that used to be. Not because something dramatic happened, because something consistent happened. Every day a little more data in the file. Every day slightly more neural mass on the side of confidence. Every day the old pathway a little quieter and the new one a little louder until the new one becomes the only voice you hear when the moment arrives and asks you what you're going to do. Chapter 11. The Inner Dialogue. How to silence the voice that's holding you back. There is a voice in your head that has been talking to you for as long as you can remember. It comments on everything you do, everything you attempt, every room you walk into, and every risk you consider taking. Most people assume this voice is them, that it is their authentic self, offering an honest assessment of who they are and what they are capable of. It isn't. It is a learned script, a soundtrack assembled over years from the voices of other people, the outcomes of past experiences, the accumulated conclusions your subconscious drew from every moment it filed away as evidence. And for the majority of people, that script is overwhelmingly critical, relentlessly limiting, and brutally focused on every reason why you should stay small, stay quiet, and stay safe. Understanding that the voice is not you is one of the most liberating realizations available to a human being. You are not the narrator. You are the one listening to the narrator. And because you are the listener rather than the voice, you have something the voice does not. The ability to change what it says. The inner dialogue is the single most persistent influence on your confidence because it never stops. External events are sporadic. Social judgments come and go, but the voice inside your head runs continuously. And the cumulative effect of thousands of micro messages per day, each one nudging you slightly toward confidence or slightly away from it, is more powerful than any single external experience could ever be. This is why two people can share the exact same success and one walks away feeling capable while the other immediately attributes the success to luck and starts waiting for it to be reversed. The external event was identical. The inner dialogue was not. Most people's inner dialogue was never examined and deliberately chosen. It was absorbed, and because it was absorbed passively, it reflects whatever the dominant voices in your environment were saying, both to you directly and among themselves in your presence. If you grew up around people who regularly spoke of failure as permanent, of risk as foolish, of ambition as arrogance, your inner narrator absorbed that as the appropriate commentary on bold action. And now every time you try to take bold action, that absorbed commentary runs on cue, not because it's true, because it's the script that was installed. The first step to changing the inner dialogue is not to silence it by force. You cannot bully your way out of habitual thought. The subconscious is not impressed by brute force and will simply reassert the old pattern the moment conscious effort relaxes. The first step is awareness. You have to begin catching the voice in the act, noticing the moment it fires, recognizing the specific language it uses and understanding what type of situation triggers it most reliably. When do you hear it most loudly? Before you speak in a group, before you pursue something important to you, after a setback, in the presence of someone you perceive as more successful. Notice the pattern. Map the triggers because you cannot modify what you cannot see. And right now, for most people, the inner dialogue runs entirely on autopilot. Once you can catch it, you can do something extraordinarily important with it. You can question it, not just dismiss it, not silence it, not try to think positive instead of hearing it. Question it. When the voice says, "You're not good enough for this," ask with genuine curiosity, "Is that actually true?" Not as a rhetorical exercise, but as an actual evidentiary challenge. What proof does that statement have? What contradictory evidence is being ignored? Where did that conclusion come from? Who first said it? And was that person actually a reliable source of truth about you? In almost every case, when you cross-examine the inner critic rather than simply accepting its verdict, the case it makes turns out to be extraordinarily weak. Built on one or two painful experiences elevated to a universal truth and then shielded from challenge by the confirmation bias of a subconscious that selectively noticed only the supporting evidence. The second step is active replacement. This is where the work of building a new inner dialogue begins, and it follows the same neurological principles you already understand. Repetition, emotional intensity, and consistency. Every time the old voice fires, you have a choice. You can let it run and strengthen the old pathway, or you can consciously respond with a counter-instruction stated with conviction and immediately act in a way that is consistent with the new instruction rather than the old critique. The language of the new inner dialogue matters enormously. It should not be the saccharine positivity of "I am amazing at everything," which the subconscious will reject immediately as obviously inconsistent with its evidence base. It should be the grounded, firm, possibility-oriented language of someone who takes themselves seriously. Instead of "I am not good at this," the new dialogue says "I am not good at this yet and I am learning." Instead of "I always fail at this kind of thing," it says "I have failed at this before and I know more now than I did then." Instead of "Who am I to try this," it says exactly "Who am I not to." These reframes are not delusional. They are accurate. They honor the current reality while refusing to let it set the ceiling. Over time, with daily and consistent practice, the new language becomes the dominant language. The old critic does not disappear overnight. For a while, it remains commenting alongside the new voice. And your job is simply to act from the new voice rather than the old one. But as the weeks pass and the new voice accumulates evidence from your actions and the old voice fails to accumulate the catastrophic outcomes it predicted, something shifts. The old voice grows quieter. Not because you fought it into silence, because you starved it of confirmation. You stopped providing it with the behavioral evidence it needed to keep building its case. You stopped hesitating when it told you to hesitate. You stopped shrinking when it told you to shrink. And a narrative that is never confirmed eventually stops being told with the same conviction. There is also a more advanced phase of working with the inner dialogue that becomes available once the basic practice is established, and it is one of the most powerful reframes available. Rather than treating the inner critic as an enemy to defeat, you begin treating it as a signal. The moment the critical voice fires loudly is the exact moment that something meaningful is on the other side of the resistance. The critic gets loudest when the stakes are highest and when the potential for genuine growth is closest. Elite performers in every field have learned this. The nervousness before the performance is not a warning to stop. It is proof that this matters. The self-doubt before the important conversation is not evidence of inadequacy. It is your nervous system telling you that something real is about to happen and that it is paying attention. When you begin to read the critic as a compass rather than a judge, when the arrival of self-doubt becomes a cue to lean in rather than a reason to back off, you have crossed a threshold that most people never reach. Because most people spend their entire lives trying to eliminate the internal resistance before taking action. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel certain. They wait for the critic to stop talking. And because the critic never fully stops, they wait forever. The shift from treating the inner critic as an obstacle to treating it as a directional signal is one of the most transformative changes in the entire rewiring process. You stop fighting the voice. You start using it. Confident people are not people without an inner critic. They are people whose inner champion has been developed to the point where it speaks more loudly, more consistently, and with more accumulated evidence behind it than the critic does. That is entirely achievable. And it is achieved one conversation at a time between you and the voice inside your own mind. Chapter 12. The Compound Effect of Confidence. How Small Wins Stack into Unshakable Self-Belief. There is a dangerous illusion that surrounds the way most people think about confidence. And it goes like this. Confidence is something you either have or you do not. And the people who have it got it from some significant source. A natural disposition. A dramatic turning point, a defining moment that fundamentally changed how they saw themselves. The illusion makes confidence feel binary. Either the switch flips or it does not. Either the moment arrives or you keep waiting. The reality is entirely different. Confidence, real confidence, the kind that holds up under pressure and does not collapse when the stakes get high, is not built in moments. It is built in increments. It is built the way a wall is built, one brick at a time. Each brick almost imperceptibly small on its own. Each one adding so slightly to the structure that from day to day you can barely see the progress. But after a year the wall is standing solid and you can barely remember what the empty space used to look like. The bricks of confidence are small wins. Actions you took that you were not sure you could take. Conversations you had that you thought would go badly and did not. Risks you accepted that turned out survivable. Moments where fear was present and you moved anyway and nothing terrible happened. Each of these is a deposit into what you might think of as your confidence account. Each one is a piece of evidence filed in your subconscious under the category. This person can handle things, and each piece of evidence on its own seems minor, but stacked it becomes the empirical foundation of genuine self-belief, not belief manufactured by affirmations alone. Belief built from the accumulated proof of your own track record. This is why the instruction to start small, which sounds almost insultingly simple, is actually one of the most strategically important pieces of advice for someone who wants to build confidence. Because starting small is not about being timid. It is about engineering early wins that generate the neural data your subconscious needs to begin updating its assessment of what you are capable of. If you try to do too much too soon, the subconscious panic response floods the system, the experience registers as aversive and the confidence account takes a withdrawal instead of a deposit. But if you calibrate the challenge to something that stretches you slightly beyond your current comfort zone, something that requires you to override the resistance, but that you can actually get through, the experience becomes a win. And wins compound exactly the way interest compounds in a bank account. Consider the mathematics of 1% improvement. If you improve by just 1% each day, you do not end the year 1% better than you started. You end the year 37 times better. That is not motivational math. That is the actual arithmetic of compounding, and it applies with full force to confidence. Every single day that you take a small action in spite of hesitation. Every day you keep the promise you made to yourself about how you were going to show up. Every day you catch the inner critic and respond with the new language instead of accepting the old verdict. Each of these is a fraction of a percent invisible on its own. Extraordinary in aggregate. The practical implication of this is something that most people get exactly backward. Most people wait for a big win to feel confident enough to take the next big step. They want the promotion before they believe they can lead the relationship, before they believe they are lovable. The applause before they believe they can perform. But confidence does not precede the win. Confidence is the result of the accumulated record of small wins that came before it. The sequence is action first, evidence second, belief third. Not belief first, action second. You do not wait to feel confident. You act, survive, log the evidence, and use that evidence to inch the needle of self-belief forward. Repeat enough times and the needle moves so far in the new direction that it becomes the anchor. This is also why keeping promises to yourself is one of the most neurologically powerful things you can do for your confidence. Every time you say you are going to do something and then do it, regardless of whether anyone else is watching or knows, regardless of whether it felt easy or required you to overcome significant resistance, you are making a deposit. You are filing evidence. You are telling your subconscious, I am the kind of person who follows through. And the subconscious, which is always monitoring for behavioral consistency with identity, begins to update. The identity of someone who follows through starts to become more strongly established than the identity of someone who does not. Conversely, every time you set a standard for yourself and do not meet it, every time you say you will do something and quietly let it slide, you make a withdrawal. You tell your subconscious, I am actually not the kind of person who follows through on this. And the subconscious, faithful as ever to its mission of maintaining behavioral coherence with identity, subtly makes the next act of following through slightly harder. This is the mechanism by which small, seemingly inconsequential self-betrayals compound into the deeply felt sense that you cannot trust yourself. And it works in the opposite direction with equal precision. The person you are becoming will not be built by one courageous moment. It will be built by thousands of small, almost invisible moments in which you chose the action that the confident version of you would take when the alternative would have been to do what the old version of you always did. 1,000 moments multiplied by 1% improvement produces a different person. A person whose subconscious has so much accumulated evidence for their own capability that confidence is no longer something they have to consciously manufacture. It has become the organic output of a record that speaks for itself. You do not need a dramatic turning point. You need tomorrow morning and then the morning after that. There is one more thing to address about the compound effect of confidence, and it is the relationship between motivation and systems. Most people rely on motivation to drive the accumulation of small wins. They take action when they feel inspired, when they feel ready, when the internal conditions feel favorable enough to justify the effort. But motivation is a fluctuating resource. It rises and falls with your mood, your energy, your circumstances, and the perceived distance between where you are and where you want to be. If you wait to feel motivated before you take the daily actions that build confidence, you will take them sporadically. And sporadically is not often enough to compound. The solution is systems. Instead of relying on the feeling of motivation to produce daily action, you build structures that make the daily action automatic. You attach your confidence-building practices to existing routines so that they happen by default rather than by decision. Affirmations happen at the same moment in your morning routine, so they require no decision about whether today is the right day for them. Visualization happens at the same time each evening, so it requires no discussion with yourself about whether you feel like doing it. The small daily exposure, whatever your current graduated challenge is, happens at the same scheduled point in your day. So, it is already decided that it will happen before the resistance has a chance to generate an argument against it. When confidence-building practices are embedded in a system rather than dependent on motivation, they compound reliably. The wall gets a brick every day, regardless of whether you were feeling inspired that day. And the wall that gets a brick every day is the only wall that eventually becomes unassailable. Chapter 13. Emotional Regulation Under Pressure. Staying confident. When everything goes wrong, every confidence-building practice works beautifully under calm conditions. When the stakes are low, when the environment is supportive, when things are going generally in the direction you hoped, the techniques deliver, the affirmations feel right, the visualizations flow, the identity shift holds, but then something happens. A public failure, a sharp rejection, a high-pressure situation where your old patterns come roaring back with a force that sweeps the new ones aside like they were nothing. And in those moments, the question is not whether you have the tools. The question is whether you have developed the emotional regulation to use them when they are hardest to access. Because here is the truth about high-pressure situations and the nervous system. Stress does not just make things emotionally difficult. It physically compromises your access to the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought, long-term perspective, and deliberate decision-making. When your brain registers a threat, real or perceived, it routes resources toward the older, faster parts of the brain that handle survival. Your thinking narrows. Your emotional reactivity spikes. The habits and patterns that are most deeply encoded, which in many cases means your oldest and most conditioned responses reassert themselves because they are neurologically the fastest available route. Under stress, you do not automatically access your best, most deliberate self. You access your most automatic self. And if your most automatic self is still running old fear-based programming, that is what you get exactly when you need it least. This is why emotional regulation is not a separate topic from confidence. It is the infrastructure confidence requires to function when it matters most. Without regulation, confidence is a fair-weather skill. It shows up when conditions are favorable and disappears the moment the pressure rises beyond a certain threshold. With regulation, with a trained practiced capacity to stay grounded in your own nervous system, even when everything around you is chaotic, confidence becomes a weatherproof resource. It does not require the storm to stop. It functions inside the storm. So what does emotional regulation actually look like in practice and how do you build it? The starting point is understanding that regulation is not the suppression of emotion. Suppressing emotion does not make it go away. It drives it underground where it continues to influence behavior without the benefit of your conscious awareness. The confident person who never appears rattled but is actually accumulating unprocessed tension is not regulated. They are suppressed, and suppressed tension has a way of surfacing at the worst possible moments with a force proportional to how long it was held under. True regulation is something fundamentally different. It is the ability to feel the emotion, acknowledge its presence without being hijacked by it, and choose your response from a place of deliberate intention rather than automatic reaction. The neurological mechanism that makes this possible is the pause. That single beat of space between stimulus and response, between what happens to you and what you do about it. In that pause, your prefrontal cortex has the opportunity to re-engage. Without the pause, the reactive brain gets an uncontested path from trigger to behavior. The entire practice of emotional regulation in a sense is the practice of extending that pause. First by 1 second, then by 5, then long enough to breathe, to assess, to choose the response that serves the outcome you actually want rather than the instinct that serves only the survival program. Breath is the fastest physiological lever you have for this. When you take a slow, deliberate breath, particularly an extended exhale, you directly activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the counterbalance to the fight-or-flight response. The heart rate slows, the biochemistry of stress begins to recede. The prefrontal cortex regains access to the moment. This is not a metaphor. This is anatomy. The breath is the one component of the autonomic nervous system that you can consciously control. And consciously controlling it is the single fastest available path to physiological calming in the middle of a high-pressure situation. A confident person who pauses for 2 deliberate breaths before responding in a tense moment is not stalling. They are running a neurological protocol that gives their best thinking a chance to re-enter the room. Beyond breath, there is the skill of reprogramming under pressure. How you interpret what is happening to you in a difficult moment is not fixed. The interpretation is a choice, and the choice you make has enormous consequences for your neurological state. If you interpret a public failure as evidence of your fundamental inadequacy, your brain responds with shame, a neurologically devastating emotional state that shuts down the systems you need to function effectively. If you interpret the same failure as data, as a signal that adjustments are needed, as an event from which something valuable can be extracted, your brain responds with something closer to curiosity or determination. States that actually enhance problem-solving capacity rather than destroying it. The resilient, emotionally regulated mind does not deny that things went wrong. It refuses to let things going wrong become a global indictment of its own worth. It separates the event from the identity. This failed does not mean I am a failure. This was difficult does not mean I cannot handle difficulty. They rejected. This does not mean I am rejectable as a human being. These distinctions are not just philosophically important. They are neurologically crucial because the story you tell about what happened determines the biochemistry of how your brain processes it. And the biochemistry of how your brain processes it determines whether you bounce back stronger or spiral deeper. The people who maintain their confidence through setbacks, failure, and pressure are not emotionally invulnerable. They feel the same discomfort you do. They experience rejection and disappointment and the gut punch of things not going as planned. The difference is not that they feel less. The difference is that they have developed through practice the regulatory skill to feel those things without losing their footing. To stay in their body while the emotion moves through rather than being swept away by it. To know that the feeling is temporary and the identity is stable. And to act from the identity while the feeling passes. There is something else that must be said about setbacks and failure because most people experience them as proof that the rewiring process is not working. They are not. Setbacks during the rewiring process are actually evidence that it is working because you are now attempting things you would not have attempted before. You are entering situations your old self avoided. And entering new situations means sometimes not succeeding immediately. The neural architecture for confident behavior in those new situations is not yet fully built. It is still under construction. And like any structure under construction, it will show imperfections before it shows completion. The critical response to a setback during the rewiring process is not retreat. It is analysis. What specifically went wrong? What can be learned from this? What adjustment is needed? And then promptly returning to the practice, the exposure, the small wins, the consistency. Confidence is not built by people who never fail. It is built by people who fail, extract the lesson and keep building. Chapter 14. Social confidence, reading rooms, owning conversations, and commanding presence. All of the internal work comes to a point of contact eventually, and that point of contact is other people. Everything you have built, every neural pathway you have rewired, every identity shift you have practiced, every small win you have stacked gets tested and expressed in the presence of other human beings. And for most people who struggle with confidence, it is specifically in social environments, in conversations, in rooms full of people. In the moments when they are being seen and evaluated that the old patterns have the tightest grip. Social confidence is not a separate skill from the confidence you have been building. It is the same rewired brain applied to the specific context of human interaction. But social environments carry a particular neurological charge. Because for a social species, the threat of rejection and exclusion activates the same primitive alarm systems as physical danger. Your brain does not cleanly distinguish between a risk to your physical safety and a risk to your social standing. Both trigger the threat response. Both cause the same narrowing of thinking, the same surge of self-protective instinct, the same pull toward whatever behavior historically felt safest, even when that behavior is precisely what you are trying to change. This is why the first principle of social confidence is the same as the first principle of everything else in this video. It begins inside, not outside. Before you focus on how to speak more effectively, how to hold better eye contact, how to command more attention in a room, you need to settle the internal environment from which all of that social behavior emerges. A person who walks into a room in a state of internal alarm, whose nervous system is running a threat assessment on every social cue around them, whose inner dialogue is already narrating how this is going to go badly, will communicate all of that before they say a single word. The body broadcasts what the mind holds. And what is broadcast before a word is spoken sets the entire relational frame for everything that follows. The practice of social confidence therefore begins before the social situation itself. It begins in the deliberate creation of an internal state that is grounded, present and anchored in the identity you have been building before you walk into the room. The meeting, the conversation, the event. Take a moment to establish that internal state deliberately, not through performance or false bravado, but through the genuine practice of settling into yourself. Breathe deliberately. Return to the identity. I am someone who belongs in this space. I am worth listening to. I can handle whatever arises in this conversation. These are not incantations. They are reminders issued to the subconscious of the identity it is supposed to be expressing in the next few minutes. When you walk in from that place, something becomes available to you that is unavailable. When you enter in a state of alarm, genuine presence, and presence is the foundational quality of social confidence, not performance, not volume, not charisma as a performed trait, presence, which is the simple but profoundly rare quality of being actually here in this conversation with this person, attending to what is actually happening in front of you. Rather than managing a simultaneous inner crisis about how you are being perceived, when you are genuinely present, you listen in a way that most people never listen. Real listening. Listening without spending the listening time constructing your own response. Listening with your full attention on understanding rather than on the management of your own impression communicates something to the person in front of you that they feel before they can articulate it. You are making them feel heard. You are making them feel that what they are saying matters to someone. And that feeling, which is one of the rarest experiences in modern social life, creates in them a warmth and openness toward you that no amount of clever speaking could produce. The most socially confident people are often not the loudest in a room. They are the ones who make everyone they speak with feel like the most interesting person present. Your body communicates what your mind holds. And this works in both directions. Your posture, your eye contact, the pace and steadiness of your breathing, the openness or closure of your physical stance. These are not just signals you send to others. They are signals you send to yourself. Your brain reads your own body language as evidence about your internal state. When you stand tall with your feet planted, your chest open, your gaze level and unhurried, your brain receives that data and interprets it as this person is safe, grounded and capable. The confidence expressed in the posture precedes and then reinforces the confidence in the mind. This is a deliberate tool available to you in any moment in the seconds before a challenging social interaction. Deliberately adopting the physical posture of someone completely at ease in this space is not theater. It is a neurological prompt sending your own brain a signal about the state it should be generating. When you speak, speak from the same grounded internal place. This does not mean speaking slowly or loudly or with performed authority. It means speaking from the identity you have built without the habitual qualifications and apologies that erode social presence more than almost anything else. Most people with low social confidence hedge everything they say. They prefix their thoughts with "this might be wrong but are sorry to interrupt" or "maybe this is a dumb question" before saying anything of substance, systematically undermining the value of their own contribution before anyone else has a chance to evaluate it. Stop hedging. The content of what you say deserves to land on its own merits. Say it clean. Let it be received. Trust that you are allowed to take up space in this conversation. Reading a room is not a mystical talent. It is the natural byproduct of genuine presence and the practice of attending to what is actually there rather than what you are afraid is there. When your nervous system is not consumed by its own threat assessment, your perceptual capacity opens. You begin to notice the emotional temperature of a conversation. You pick up on what someone actually needs from this exchange, which is often different from what they are explicitly saying. You feel the shift in energy when a topic resonates versus when it falls flat. You read the nonverbal signals that run beneath the spoken content, the small adjustments in posture, the quality of attention, the micro expressions that tell you whether you are connecting or losing the thread. None of this requires a specific technique. It requires being genuinely here rather than simultaneously managing an inner crisis. Owning a conversation is not about talking the most. It is about being the most present, the most genuinely interested, the most reliably grounded, and the most willing to say what is true without hedging it into invisibility. These qualities attract attention and trust not through performance, but through something that registers below the level of conscious evaluation in everyone around you. They feel it before they name it. And what they feel is this person knows who they are. That quality, more than any specific social skill or verbal technique, is what social confidence actually looks and feels like from the outside, and it is the natural output of everything you have been building from the inside. One final element of social confidence that most people dramatically underestimate is the power of silence and pacing. People who lack confidence tend to fill every silence, to rush through their sentences, to speak faster when they sense uncertainty, as if speed and volume can compensate for the internal unsteadiness they feel. This is the exact behavior that communicates the anxiety they are trying to hide. Slowing down does the opposite. A person who speaks at a measured pace, who allows a natural silence to settle between sentences without rushing to fill it, who finishes their thought completely before registering the other person's reaction, communicates control, not cold mechanical control. The settled, unflustered kind that comes from someone who is not afraid of the space around their words. Silence in a conversation, held by someone who is genuinely comfortable in their own presence, is one of the most powerful social signals available. It gives the other person room to respond. It communicates that you are not desperate for their approval. It says without words that you trust what you just said to stand on its own without being immediately defended or qualified. Most people cannot hold silence because silence feels like exposure. The confident person holds it because silence is simply space and they are as comfortable in it as in speech. Chapter 15. The tipping point when confidence stops being something you build and starts being who you are. There is a moment that comes in the rewiring process that almost no one sees coming and almost no one can adequately describe afterward because it does not announce itself. There is no dramatic revelation, no single event that marks the boundary. No morning you wake up and feel a shift. It arrives quietly somewhere in the accumulation of all the small things you have been doing. And you notice it only when you look back. When you realize that the situation that once paralyzed you now barely registers as a challenge. That the conversation you once spent 3 days dreading is now just a conversation. That the version of yourself who needed to be talked into every small act of boldness seems somehow like someone else, someone you remember but no longer inhabit. This is the tipping point, and understanding what it actually is mechanically and neurologically will help you reach it. The tipping point is the moment when the new neural pathways you have been building become stronger than the old ones they were built to replace. Up until this moment, change has required consistent effort. Each act of confidence has required you to consciously override the pull of the old pattern. The old pathway was still there, still getting input from habit, still filing the occasional piece of confirmatory evidence, still whispering its old familiar commentary in your ear. The new pathway was growing, but both were present, and the effort of choosing the new one every time was real and sometimes exhausting. You were building against resistance. And then somewhere past a threshold that the science of neuroplasticity has not yet been able to precisely predict for any individual, the balance tips. The new pathway has been reinforced enough times, has accumulated enough evidence, has been associated with enough emotional intensity that it becomes the path of least resistance. Your brain's default route shifts. The behavior that used to require conscious override becomes the spontaneous automatic response. The confidence that used to need to be summoned becomes the thing that is simply there. This is not permanent invulnerability. Stress will still activate older responses. Sometimes high-stakes situations will still generate nervousness. But the nervous system's default setting has moved. Home base has changed, and returning to old patterns now requires as much conscious effort as moving away from them once did. This shift is real. It is measurable in the brain. The neural pathways for confident thought and behavior genuinely become more efficiently conducted, more myelinated, more automatic. The neural pathways for self-doubt and avoidance genuinely begin to thin from disuse, their signals weakening as they are repeatedly not reinforced. What neuroscience calls synaptic pruning you experience as freedom, a quiet, undramatic, utterly genuine freedom from the patterns that once ran your life without your permission. But there is something important to understand about the tipping point. It cannot be rushed and it cannot be detected in advance. The only way to reach it is to keep doing the work on the days when the work does not seem to be producing any visible result. This is the hardest part because the compounding process is largely invisible until it suddenly is not. Day after day of consistent practice produces no obviously perceptible change in who you are. The improvement is happening below the threshold of daily observation, accumulating in the neural architecture of your brain in ways you cannot see or feel on any given Tuesday. And then one day without warning, you are in a situation that would have destroyed you 6 months ago. And you are not destroyed. You are simply in the situation handling it the way you always imagined handling it in your best moments, and something quiet happens inside you. You realize that the person you were practicing being has become the person you are. This is why consistency rather than intensity is the non-negotiable element of the entire process. A week of furious effort followed by 2 weeks of nothing is not how the brain builds lasting architecture. The brain builds architecture through signal frequency, the regularity with which a pathway is activated, not the drama of any single activation. The person who does something small every day for 6 months will arrive at the tipping point. The person who does something large every few weeks will not. This is not a question of willpower or motivation. It is a question of understanding what the process actually requires and providing it with the same reliability. And without exception that you would bring to any other thing you take seriously, everything you do daily in service of this rewiring is infrastructure. The affirmations delivered each morning with full emotional conviction. The visualization practiced each evening with the complete sensory detail of someone who believes it matters. The small actions taken in spite of hesitation, not because the hesitation is gone, but because you have learned to move through it anyway. The identity held firmly through difficulty, through doubt, through the days when old patterns reassert themselves and you have to consciously choose the new one again. The inner critic caught and countered the social situations entered from a grounded internal state. The emotional regulation applied in the moments of pressure. The promises kept to yourself when no one else was watching. None of this is dramatic. All of it is essential. And all of it is compounding beneath the surface in the physical structure of your brain. Every single day when the tipping point arrives, you will not feel like a different person in any theatrical sense. You will feel more like yourself than you ever have. Because the version of you that was always buried under the programming, under the fear, under the accumulated weight of other people's voices telling you who you were and who you were not. That version will simply be present. Not because you manufactured it, not because you built a performance, but because you systematically removed everything that was in the way. Confidence in its most real and lasting form is not a layer you add to yourself. It is something underneath that gets uncovered. The work of rewiring your brain is not the work of becoming someone you are not. It is the work of dismantling what was installed over who you already were before the programming, before the conditioning, before anyone got to you and told you that you should take up less space. Speak with less authority. Reach for less than you were capable of. Every technique in this video, every pillar, every method, every principle was pointing toward a single destination. Not a more confident performance of yourself, a more complete expression of yourself, the full version, the version that does not apologize for what it wants or who it is. The version that walks into rooms and occupies them rather than trying to disappear into them. The version that speaks because it has something to say, not because it has calculated that its words are likely to be received well. The version that fails sometimes and gets back up not because it is unaffected by falling, but because it has long since decided that falling is not the same as being finished. That version of you is not somewhere in the future. It is the version of you that will be revealed as the rewiring continues and the old programming gives way. It has always been there. You were simply never taught how to find it. Now you know, and knowing is the beginning, but only if the beginning leads to the work. Start it today. Every day after today, add a brick. One affirmation delivered with full emotional conviction. One visualization run in complete sensory detail. One moment of hesitation overridden. One 5-second override executed. One small promise kept to yourself. One quiet act of treating yourself as the kind of person who can handle this because you can. And somewhere beneath all the programming that told you otherwise, you always could. The brain that builds confidence is the brain you already have. You are simply learning at last how to use it. There will be days when none of this feels true. Days when the old patterns return with surprising force. When the voice of doubt is louder than any counter instruction you can produce. When the gap between who you are becoming and who you feel like in that moment seems impossibly wide. Those days are not failures. They are part of the process. They are the nervous system testing the new architecture under adverse conditions. And what you do on those days matters more than what you do on the easy ones. Because the days when the resistance is loudest are the days when building through it produces the deepest, most durable neural reinforcement. On those days, you do not need to feel confident. You do not need to believe the process is working. You do not need to feel inspired or certain or ready. You need only to take one action. The smallest possible action that moves you in the right direction. One breath taken deliberately. One sentence spoken from the new identity rather than the old. One moment of resistance felt and moved through rather than surrendered to. Just one. Because every day you show up and do one thing in spite of the difficulty. You are telling your subconscious something that no amount of external validation ever could. That you are the kind of person who does not quit on yourself.